What is up? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I don't know when you're watching this, but it is currently 12 o'clock on the East Coast and probably earlier wherever you might be. But this is the last episode of Monday's Anxiety. But you may notice Josh isn't here and the background looks way different. That's because we are ending the season where we start the season, and that is with a mock draft every week from March until August. Club Fantasy does weekly mock draft shows, and this is the first/last episode of that. I am Ryan Weisse, your host. My co-host for these mock draft adventures is Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are you doing this afternoon? I'm so used to being 11 o'clock on a Monday, and it is 12 o'clock on a Monday. So how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. It's the time. It's the time to start mock drafting. As soon as the season's done, it's time for next year.
Yeah, Joel Worth wants to waste no time, and I do like to get these drafts started as quickly as possible. So first thing I'm going to do, shout out to Josh on the dope new background for Mock It Like It's Hot. Not shout out to Joe Zolo for not having an intro video for us yet. However, let's get the draft up here and let me go ahead and get the draft started, and then Austin and I can continue talking. Joel has the first pick, so he'll be making that first pick here shortly. I got to make sure all my noises are off.
Oh, you are out of practice, my man.
Obviously. It's been way too long. You and I haven't done this since end of August, so picks are flying in. And Austin, you don't have the first pick, but I wanted to put you directly on the spot for our first question. We're going to talk playoffs a little bit. Folks, if you've never watched this show before, we do not talk about every single player who's drafted. We might even talk about every team that does a draft pick, but we are going to focus on the interesting players and what we think about their value heading into 2024. But Austin, you don't have the first pick in this draft. I want to know right off the rip, how would you handle the first pick of a 2024 fantasy draft right now?
I mean, how do you not go with Christian McCaffrey? If you're anybody but
How
Joel
do you
Worth,
not?
Joel's just not going to pick a running back in the first round. I get it, but geez, like he has just had a crazy year. It's hard to argue with that. After I doubted him last year, I thought Elijah Mitchell was going to cause him to not be the best player in fantasy football. That was a mistake. So I'm in on the Christian McCaffrey train as of today, but who knows? That could just be recency bias.
There you go. I do see my internet is giving me the little internet bubble. So if I have any problems here, I apologize, guys. Hopefully it doesn't affect us. First and foremost, thank you to everybody who's tuning in. If you haven't liked and subscribed us on YouTube, we would very much appreciate it if you do. It literally costs you nothing. And go ahead and drop in the comments who you're taking with the first pick of draft next year. An interesting player that we threw out recently on a show. And actually, before I bring this up, Austin, I want to let people know a little bit about what's going on in the background on Sleeper. Sleeper is not optimized for 2024 yet. So there are no rookies in this draft. So we're not going to be talking rookies, which is great because I don't know who the fuck they are anyway. Go Marvin Harrison. Also, the ADP is set up for 2023. So you're going to see on auto picks, Austin Eckler go too high and other players who we think should fall. I am hoping it doesn't affect a player who has already been brought up in the chat, and we're going to see how he plays out because I definitely want to talk about him. However, you are going to need people to search for, and I know it's bad etiquette to talk about players before they're drafted, but this is a mock draft, so who cares? Guys are going to need to search for Puka Nacua. They're going to need to search for, some of these rookies that broke out. But more importantly, Austin, they're going to need to search for Kyren Williams. And I want to know how you are approaching Kyren Williams, who missed 5 games this year and is still, I believe, the RB5 in fantasy football right now. And so the long and short is, there are arguments to be made if you are a running back heavy drafter. Kyren Williams has every bit the right to be considered maybe the second pick of a fantasy draft next year.
I think he does. I mean, he had Christian McCaffrey-like usage this year. And that's the thing when it comes to fantasy football that sometimes we forget to look at is just the amount of usage players get in their offense. Sometimes we just get razzle-dazzled by how a player looks whenever they run the ball. Like Isaiah Pacheco is a great example. He looks fun to watch. Whenever you watch him run, he's a fun player to watch. And I think we get caught up in that more than looking at the fact that he's not used as much in that offense as we might want for him to be an RB1.
Yeah, I think that's great. I want to get our buddy Josh Hudson up here. Takes the Monday off, but still playing along with us. Josh is the first one I heard mention that Kyren Williams is the RB2 right now, and he cannot be convinced otherwise. I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out in the offseason. The Rams are obviously in the playoffs, but what happens with Matthew Stafford and some of the other pieces of that team? I believe they owe Cooper Kupp a lot of money, and he is now a 31-year-old with an injury history. I'm not going to call him injury prone. I don't throw that term around, but there's certainly an injury history with Cooper Kupp. I do want to throw Caesar up on the screen right now. Rest in peace, Team 3. I warned you guys. The ADP is messed up. So yes, Austin Eckler going to the 3rd pick is probably not the best option for Jacob Lundy. And what's even worse is I was chatting with Jacob before this draft started. I don't know if he missed that it was Austin, you motherfucker. Sorry, folks. Breaking news. Austin takes the player I want to talk about. So we're going to stop talking about Jacob Lundy. I'm going to go back to Caesar's comment. Josh, you might need to adjust this a little bit because me and Austin are just not a part of the show. Maybe move us over to the right so we can have comments up on the left. I don't know if that's something we can do with this layout. However, interested to see where Travis Kelce goes. Austin Amandolia with the 10th pick of the draft. Travis Kelce, explain yourself.
I mean, look, I did my thing where I went to Google. I said, pick a number between 1 and 12. And it happened to pick 10. And I was like, oh, that's fun. I'm curious if I will be able to get Travis Kelce at the 10th overall pick this year, because I couldn't last year. Wasn't happening. I'm not ready to quit. I'm not. I think that this was an outlier year for Travis Kelce. He's still in a down year for Travis Kelce. Was the 3rd best tight end in fantasy football. Like, are you really telling me you would rather have most other tight ends over Travis Kelce? I don't care how old he is. He was hurt this year, most of the year too, dealing with injury. He's probably going to get to rest up this offseason. I can't stop it. He's too much of a cheat code in fantasy football.
So as the premier, my ego doesn't allow me to not call myself the premier Travis Kelce drafter in fantasy football. I was advocating last year that he should have been the 2nd pick behind Christian McCaffrey. And while he still played well, he certainly wasn't worth that 2nd pick, especially with the season that Tyreek Hill, not that anybody was taking Kyron Williams with the 2nd pick, but Kelce was not worth the 2nd pick last year. Once we start following the 10th Austin, I think there is a discussion to be made. You bring up one very interesting point that I want to discuss, and we'll start talking about some of these players being taken here in a moment. And that is, you don't want any other tight end besides him. And I have one name I have to throw out to you. Guy had a pretty good game yesterday again. Sam Laporta looks like the truth. And I know rookie tight ends aren't supposed to be doing what Sam Laporta is doing. And then we have to worry about sophomore slumps. And we're seeing quite a few sophomore slumps right now from some rookies from last year. But Sam Laporta, I believe, in Dynasty, at the very least, you have to. I would rather have Laporta than Kelce. But in redraft, God, it's so hard for me to say this out loud, but I think I want Sam Laporta next year and not Travis Kelce.
Oof, I don't know if I would say not Travis Kelce. I think my stance would be, if I miss on Travis Kelce, I'm going for Sam Laporta. I feel like Laporta has kind of solidified his spot as the tight end 2 in fantasy right now. Like, the usage, it doesn't lie, and I think it's gonna sustain itself. Like, there's no, it would be shocking to me if they quit using him the way that they have this year. This isn't like an Arthur Smith situation where I feel like he's gonna take Kyle Pitts and be like, well, I'm gonna get cute and do all sorts of random stuff with Cordero Patterson. Like, that's not how Dan Campbell works. My man, he wants those beasts who are going to dominate games. And so Sam Laporta, I think, is going to continue to be the second target in that target tree. So I feel comfortable with him being the tight end 2. I think I'd be comfortable taking him in the first 3 rounds. But I still, if Kansas City has better wide receiver talent around Travis Kelce this year, next year, is it really going to shock anybody if he pops off for 120 catches and 1,200 yards?
Not even a little bit. They need to get someone other than Rashee Rice to scare defenses. And even if it's a receiving running back, so that the people who are playing the mid of the field can't strictly focus on 87, they need to be worried about somebody else. And we see some of Kelce's better games are games where Jerick McKinnon is also cooking, because then they're worried about what's going on with McKinnon. So it's a really, really good point. Austin, normally I let 3 rounds go before we talk about the draft, but this is a very interesting draft. And so I want to kind of first start with, we are seeing not as many running backs as we've seen go off the board in past years. Only 3 in the first round, 4 in the second round. Nick Chubb's an interesting pick that we're going to talk about. Jacob Lundy just building his team very dangerously, plain and simple. But let's start with the first. How far do I want to go down to this? Let's go with the first 6 running backs. Is this the order you believe in for these running backs? So Christian McCaffrey going 1. Actually, we're going to throw Eckler out of this. So we're going to call it the top 5. Christian McCaffrey going 1, Bijan Robinson going 2, Breece Hall at 3, Jahmyr Gibbs at 4. Oh, I do want to go 6. Taylor at 5, and Kieran Williams at 6. So just skip Austin Eckler in there. How do we feel about that order? Specifically, Kieran Williams being at 6. And I keep saying Kieran, it's Kyron. I've looked this up multiple times. I'm eventually going to get it right. But Kyron Williams. But more importantly, how do we feel about Jonathan Taylor working his way back up after kind of another mid-season, though this one can be blamed on injury?
Yeah, I think so. Kyron Williams feels too far down to me. I would be willing to take him ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. Detroit's track record suggests that I don't remember David Montgomery's contract situation, but Detroit's track record suggests that they're going to have another running back.
I believe it's a 2-year deal, so I think Monty will be there for 1 more at least.
So I think as much as Jahmyr Gibbs has become the number 1 back in that system, I still think he's going to have a little less upside than the likes of Kyron Williams and Jonathan Taylor, who are pretty clearly the number 1s. Like they're both 3-down backs for their teams respectively. So I would probably rather have the 2 of them. Bijan Robinson is a very interesting name, and it's going to be an interesting name this offseason because Arthur Smith being fired could make it seem like Bijan Robinson to the moon, which I don't disagree with. It's just how I think whoever they hire, it's going to depend a lot on who ends up landing that coaching job that makes me feel more or less comfortable with Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, I think we're going to be talking about that a lot on today's show is who's going to Josh. This has actually been Josh's motto for every question I've asked him recently. Who's going to be the coach? Who's going to be the quarterback? And I think there are some major questions we're going to ask specifically about some wide receivers. And let's actually get back to that. So Joel takes Justin Jefferson at number 1. Do you think it's Captain Kirk back there in Minnesota? And what if it's not? Is that going to influence how you view Justin Jefferson heading into the season? Because we saw Jefferson ball with Nick Mullins as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say most likely it's Captain Kirk in my mind. I do not imagine Kirk Cousins leaving Minnesota unless somebody is just offering him the world. We all saw in the quarterback show, he has a nice house there. I think he likes his life in Minnesota. I think he would like to stay there. And he was cooking this year before he tore his Achilles. Like I still feel like this offense functions really well with him. Even without Kirk Cousins, though, I feel good about Justin Jefferson. Like he's Justin Jefferson. He is quarterback proof. He cooked with Nick Mullins throwing pick after pick after pick the last couple of weeks of the season. So I feel fine with him still being a high draft pick. I might still take Christian McCaffrey over Jefferson, but I have no concerns about Justin Jefferson, regardless of who the quarterback is.
Perfect. Before we move along, because there's another player that's coming up soon that I want to ask about that same sort of question. Let's throw a little draft strategy in here. And this is something I think is such a great question from Steve Miller. We're starting 3 wide receivers in this league. I started it up as a 3 wide receiver, 2 flex spot. Does that make them more valuable than where you would normally draft them when you only start 2? And when we look at the 5 and 6 spots, we have 3 wide receivers taken. Very few teams so far have not landed a running back at all. You are one of those teams. But looking specifically at these teams in a league where you can start 3 wide receivers, what does that do for you to wide receiver value?
I think it does increase the wide receiver value a bit because it just means that there's more potential for you to stack the top elite options. Like if there are teams right now that have 3 receivers who all 3 could be top 12 receivers in any given week and on a regular basis. And when you are stacking that level of talent at a position, you're getting so much positional advantage over the other teams that I think it's very worth it. It's a very reasonable approach. I also think, as much as I have been against the 0 running back strategy up until this point, I think we are starting to see running backs are going to be devalued more just because this year the running back position was rough. There were all sorts of injuries. It was hard to really rely on one player to get you 17 weeks unless their name was Christian McCaffrey. Like he was he and Bijan Robinson were the only two that made it all 17 weeks. And Robinson didn't even do it at an elite level. CMC was the only one that gave you 17 elite weeks of football. So I think it's just we're starting to see the trickle down effects of how the league is valuing running backs impact fantasy football.
I think it's such a great point, and I'm going to agree with everything Austin said. Smarter people than me who fully believe in the zero running back strategy say you take at least as many wide receivers as you can start before you can even consider a running back. Obviously, if insane talent falls, maybe you pivot, but there are folks out there who say in this league, you can start 5 wide receivers. My first 5 picks are going to be wide receivers. And we saw such a, I don't want to say top heavy, we saw such a heavy influence of wide receiver scoring this year in PPR where line for line, the wide receiver 20 is beating the RB 20, the wide receiver 30 is beating the RB 30, to where it just behooves you to start as many wide receivers as possible. But you bring up a far more interesting point, and that is where the running back scoring came from this year. Because yes, Christian McCaffrey 8, Breece Hall ends up finishing the year as the RB2, Travis Etienne as the 3, but then it gets really interesting. You have Rachaad White, who was not highly touted. I think if I had to guess, Austin, I don't have ADPs in front of me. He was probably a 5th-round pick last year. Raheem Mostert was not a pick last year. Most folks had him behind Jeff Wilson in their own pecking order. Joe Mixon, Kyron Williams, Alvin Kamara, who was dealing with the suspension woes, James Cook, who maybe a little bit more valued than Rachaad White, but pretty similar in my opinion, Isaiah Pacheco, Jerome Ford came out of nowhere. We can't hold that against anyone because of the fall of Nick Chubb, James Conner, who missed games and just smashed when he played. So it does seem like we're going to a spot now where people are recognizing the wide receiver value. So they're going to fill up those wide receiver spots, which is naturally going to push running backs down. But then B, Austin, there are running backs just to be had later on in the draft.
Yeah. And I think this comes back to the point that we hit on earlier in this show. What are the characteristics that align for all of those running backs? They had a ton of volume. Yep. Right. Rachaad White was getting 20 touches a game on a regular basis. He's not the most efficient running back in the world. He's not the most touted from a prospect perspective, but he got the touches. So they all got touches and they got the touchdowns. Raheem Mostert I think he finished 2nd in the league in touchdowns by a running back, only behind Christian McCaffrey. It doesn't matter how efficient you are. If you're getting that amount of touchdown volume, you're going to be a good fantasy asset. And so I think moving forward, that's going to be the way we have to value running backs, is who is getting the most opportunities and who's getting the opportunities that can lead to touchdowns.
And Mostert, when I see where he gets drafted, he's a player I want to talk about later. And we can talk about his backfield mate who went at the 212 and from a team I would not have expected to take Devon Achane there. But that is not the point I'm going to make right now. We've already talked about Joel's team so damn much, but he made it interesting from that first pick. And man, does he make it even more interesting now? I don't know what he is doing. Joel, thank you for the conversation piece. But I want to continue with the Justin Jefferson conversation and move to a wide receiver in his same division. I don't think the rumors are as strong now as they were at the beginning of the season. But I think there was a thought that Jared Goff would not be the Detroit quarterback heading into 2024. Now they make the playoffs. They have a winnable matchup in the first round of the playoffs. So how do we feel about Amon-Ra St. Brown? Do we think it's Jared Goff? Could it be the resurrection of Hendon Hooker, who did not play a down this year? What do we feel about Amon-Ra going as the 6th pick in this draft, 7th pick in this draft?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good about it. He's getting the volume, like we said. That's going to be the thing moving forward. Is volume is king, and St. Brown, he continued to get peppered with targets all year long. I think most likely Jared Goff is back. Like the Lions aren't going to be in a position to get a new quarterback in the draft unless they're like hoping that one of these fringe, top 10 guys falls. Like there's some prospects that may fall because there are a decent amount of quarterbacks coming out, but I don't think any of them who on day one clearly will overtake Jared Goff. I mean, he just had a 30 touchdown season, and that amount of passing touchdowns is plenty to sustain Amon-Ra St. Brown and to sustain the Detroit Lions' hopes for playoff runs in the future.
Yeah, I think it would certainly be a mistake to take away from Jared Goff. It's going to be a very interesting matchup with Stafford coming back to Detroit for possibly a bit of revenge. It's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out. And Stafford was the next quarterback I want to talk about for you in this exact same situation. So Stafford is 35, about to be 36, if my math serves me correctly. He has a rookie receiver who now has more catches and more yards than any rookie receiver in NFL history in Puka Nacua. You have Cooper Kupp, who's going on 31 years old. I'm going to go with the situation that I am very nervous about Stafford being back next year. Of all the guys I'm going to bring up, because there's one more I'm going to bring up after this, I think Stafford is the one that makes me the most nervous. So I'm going to ask you this one in a hypothetical. Stafford is not back. How are you approaching Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua? I mean, obviously it depends on who the hell their quarterback is, but let's assume it's like Jake Browning, one of these backups that just slides over.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it will be a downgrade for sure, just because if they need to have a quarterback who's going to pass the ball a ton, that's going to be the main criteria that keeps those two relevant. Because if they get one of these backup quarterbacks in, it's going to just mean that I think the overall volume goes down. And that would be my concern with those two, more than necessarily the status of the quarterback that's throwing to them. It's about the volume.
Yeah. But I think it makes a really good point, because we were maybe worried about Nick Mullins until we saw that Justin Jefferson is still Justin Jefferson. And then the last one is a player. I love the player I'm about to mention. Let me be clear. It's his quarterback that I'd rather just never fucking talk about. Garrett Wilson. So he gets drafted as the number 12 pick in this draft. The assumption, I'm guessing, with a pick like that is that Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. I was one of the people who were pouring water on the Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback at the beginning of this season, because he wasn't very good in Green Bay in 2022. And now all of a sudden we're like, he's the fucking hope with the New York Jets. And that hope lasted 4 plays. Garrett Wilson was mighty mediocre without a real quarterback for the second straight season. This is not a Garrett Wilson problem. Let me be very clear. But Austin, are you willing to take Garrett Wilson in the first round if that's the draft capital it's going to take to get Garrett Wilson on you?
That's a really great question. I think probably I would prefer to take him in the second round, just because you have Puka Nacua, Chris Olave. Those are guys that are that in this draft went after Garrett Wilson that I think have more upside than Wilson. Just given the uncertainty of the quarterback position. I get the bet you're making, and I think it's a fine bet to make. I want to hear some more updates on where Aaron Rodgers is at, and also just who is the backup there. I think that's going to start becoming a weird thing that we have to pay attention to. Is like
that's a really good point.
Is the backup still going to be Zach Wilson next year? Because I don't care if Garrett Wilson had 1,000-yard season despite Zach Wilson being a trash quarterback. He got drafted as a first-round receiver last year and finished wide receiver 23. So, it's not just going to be about, is Aaron Rodgers back? It's going to be, who is backing him up? Who can they provide the stability to provide Garrett Wilson targets, regardless of what happens to Rodgers? That's what we saw in Cleveland, and that's why Amari Cooper was as relevant, and David Njoku were both as relevant as they were down the stretch. But we wouldn't have been able to predict that. Joe Flacco wasn't even on the team, so I don't know how you can properly evaluate Garrett Wilson at this point. If you just take the risk on Aaron Rodgers' Achilles holding up still, that's fine. I think you just have to be willing to make that bet.
Yeah, it's no offense to Chris B, a friend of the show. He was on with Club Fantasy on our Saturday show this past week. But Garrett Wilson, of all of these first-round picks, is probably the one I'm least likely to take, though there's probably an argument to be made for A.J. Brown as well. He's had some consistency issues this year. I'm going to skip Jacob's team for the time being just because he didn't make his own first-round pick, but I want to talk about Tyreek Hill. Obviously, Justin Jefferson's the one. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey's the two, or vice versa, however you want to make that argument. Tyreek Hill versus the next pick, our buddy Mark, CD Lamb. How do we feel about these guys? Tyreek Hill put a death date on his own career last season. I believe he said he's playing next year and 1 year after that. So 2 more seasons of Tyreek Hill in a season where he just, at least at the beginning, did whatever he wanted to do. But then at the end, CD Lamb did whatever he wanted to do. So Austin, you were stuck with the 3rd pick of a draft. McCaffrey and Justin Jefferson were the first 2 picks. Are you taking Hill? Are you taking Lamb? Or are you going elsewhere?
I'm taking Hill. And here's why. Tyreek Hill has shown it does not matter who is throwing him the ball. And I think that is the thing that really appeals to me about taking Hill at the 3 spot. Tua Tagovailoa, he's had a good season from an NFL perspective, don't get me wrong. However, he's not, I wouldn't call him a top 8 quarterback, and it doesn't matter. Tyreek Hill is still going to pop off. He still, every time the ball gets in his hands, you think he could score a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb, he is great. I don't want to take anything away from him and the season he has had because it's historic for that franchise. I don't have the same faith that if somebody besides Dak Prescott is throwing him the ball, that he continues to perform the way he is. I think this year what we saw was the Cowboys were like, we're going to target CeeDee Lamb. He's our number 1 receiver, so we need to pepper him with volume. And if for some reason defenses are able to shut that down or Dak Prescott gets hurt, I worry more about CeeDee Lamb's longevity than Tyreek Hill. Obviously, I'm taking CeeDee Lamb at the 4th pick if Tyreek Hill is gone. So it's not like I'm dinging him that much, but as a tiebreaker, I take Hill over Lamb.
Yeah. First of all, I want to throw Chris up here. He said, no offense taken. He's just having fun drafting in January. Exactly, folks. We are not starting our mock drafts this early. We are not complete degenerates, contrary to what Zach is saying in the chat right now. I typically like to take a hiatus during the NFL playoffs until March, but we wanted to start the season or end the season where we started the season, and that's with a mock draft. You're going to see this show come back in March, and we do mock drafts every single week. We're going to start really hard with Dynasty, and then as we get into the summer, we're going to shift to best ball, and we're going to shift to redrafts. So we have a ton of fun with this. We'll make sure we get you guys invited. It's actually going to be a really, really fun show this season. Josh has already given us the fire backgrounds. Maybe Joe will get off of his ass and actually get us an intro video. Andrea said she did a mock last night already. So we're behind the curve here. And then I know our good friends over at Destination Devi are doing a Devi mock, or Devi Royale. My apologies. Devi Royale is doing a Devi mock today as well. Our buddy Kevin over there. So it's mock draft season, long and short. And Chris did throw out there that he wanted AJ Brown and Panic picked when he got sniped there. And this, Chris, I'm so glad you said that. I'm going to throw that up on the screen and cover our faces up here for a second. This is why I started this show. Mock drafting is not about getting the best team, the best players. These guys are never going to play it down. Mock drafting is about learning what you're going to do on the clock, and your player goes a pick ahead of you. Mock drafting is about getting comfortable with the platform that you're using and getting an idea of where players are going to go. That's what it's all about. So, Chris, I am so glad you brought that up, because that's what this is a lot for, or that is what this is for a lot of people, is that you don't know what's going to happen when AJ Brown goes a pick before you, and shit, who the hell am I going to take now? Just give me Garrett Wilson. Who cares that he has no quarterback? But yeah, such an interesting point. And then I saw a comment I wanted to bring up. I missed it. Oh, I have it starred. Craig thanks us for ending the season on a 8-game win streak. Don't thank us. That's all you. We appreciate you. However, Craig does bring up that he normally drafts Jalen Hurts and Jalen Waddle in his 2 years playing, and they did not look good to end the season. So, Austin, let's just talk about those 2 players, because I think there's a discussion to be had about the quarterbacks, and that's where we're going to start. And then Jalen Waddle as a 3rd-round pick. So last year after the season, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes had set themselves so far apart from the crew that we thought we were going to see quarterbacks go early. That certainly did not pay off, Austin. Quarterbacks all scored basically the same amount of points. Patrick Mahomes had earned the nickname Patrick Mid-Homes from me by the end of the season, because that's what he was giving you every week. In this draft, he goes as the 211 as an auto pick, but then a full round later, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. How are you going to be approaching quarterbacks next year? I guess my question to you is, what is your cutoff round for when you're going to draft an elite quarterback?
I mean, basically for me, if Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson are off the board, that's my cutoff. Whenever that happens, I'll wait and I'll punt at quarterback until later. But I think late third round for Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, that just feels like such a value. I'm like, I was shocked that they fell that far. Honestly, I'm kind of curious, like, is our NFL brain biasing our fantasy brain? Like, those 2 players have been volatile, and Josh Allen just threw 2 interceptions and had a fumble last night. So are we saying like, oh, that's a reason to not draft him in the first 2 rounds? And Jalen Hurts, oh damn, I wanted to. Okay, I have to pivot now, so I'm just gonna leave you with that.
Well, and Chris, if you want to talk about real pressure, imagine getting sniped and having to pivot while also live on screen talking about other people's players. So this is a learning experience for all of us, and you're going to see just pure chaos on this show throughout the season. We have a lot of fun with it. I've had it where Austin's auto picked before because I had him talking about a point and forgot to remind him that his pick was actually up on the screen. I actually quit drafting with you guys so I could strictly focus on the hosting aspect of all of this. And Austin may time out again, it looks like.
I'm working on it. I don't what's happening.
But yeah, I used to draft with you guys, and then I realized that it was so hard to keep up with the chat and to make not incompetent draft picks. I was about to say hard to make incompetent draft picks, but I'm very good at making incompetent draft picks. George apologizes for the snipe there, Austin. Well, let's get back to that quarterback discussion.
Oh, that's all good. I think the two of them are values. Like, I think it's surprising to me that they fall that far. They're still, I think Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts, they both have the opportunity to get up into, 30, 40 points on any given Sunday. And that's still going to be, particularly on your scoring system, quarterbacks are going to be your largest source of fantasy points. So having that elite player is still worth it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think the biggest takeaway I have from where these quarterbacks have went, my cutoff round. So when you play with industry people, and I'm not trying to sound like an elitist or anything, I play in a shit ton of leagues. And I know that in my more casual leagues, quarterbacks are going to go early. In my more industry focused leagues, they're going to go late. I am usually the first one to go quarterback, and it's usually the 5th round where I can get a guy like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, something like that. Looking at this, which these mock drafts are all just fun at this point in the year, to see Lamar Jackson fall another round behind those guys is interesting to me because at least recently he played his ass off. So it seems like recency bias didn't play into that at all because you would have typically seen him go a pick or two after Hurts and Josh Allen. So next year, Austin, we're going to get a Lamar Jackson for the first time in a long time. Same system, same wide receivers, should have Mark Andrews back, and Gus Edwards is a year older. J.K. Dobbins is another ankle or knee or whatever injury he has away from ending his career. Obviously, Keaton Mitchell looked good there for a while. But what I'm getting at is next season, we should get more of good Lamar with far less question marks. Is Lamar a guy that now belongs in the conversation with that top 4?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, honestly, he kind of always was. Like, he had 2 years with an injury, and then everybody's like, oh, I'm down on Lamar, he's number 5. But honestly, I mean, let's just say from an NFL perspective, I put Lamar Jackson ahead of Josh Allen in general. And so I think they're definitely in the same conversation from a fantasy perspective. He had very few passing touchdowns this year, given the success of that offense. And I just don't think that's going to repeat itself. Honestly, I think that positive regression will hit, and he'll start throwing for more touchdown passes next year. And you throw that in with the possibility that he rushes for 100 yards and a touchdown in any given week. Like, I don't see how you avoid that and how you let that go until the 4th round.
Yeah. I'm going to throw Craig's comment up here real quick and says, he went RB, but should check on quarterback. I've always said in fantasy football, there's a nice little thing. There's an advantage to being the first person to take the quarterback because the world is your oyster and you've decided that's the can of worms you're opening. There's also an advantage to being the last person to take quarterback because you're going to let the draft come to you and you're going to draft the best talent at every other position. So don't fret about quarterback in a 1 QB league until you start getting into like 14 and 16 person leagues. But in a 12 person league, I'm absolutely fine. And Austin, you are just getting destroyed in the chat for your Miles Sanders pick. So they're saying you're going for clickbait. You might as well have auto picked. After George apologized to you, Stephen Miller just didn't even understand why you made this Miles Sanders pick. So can you defend Miles Sanders, or was this a panic pick with the clock ticking in your ear?
This was a panic pick. So I don't know that I would do it again. Let's be clear. I wanted James Conner or Brian Robinson to fall. So I got sniped twice on that front.
Okay.
And then it's just like, maybe I would have taken Ty Chandler if I had realized he was there, but I was just scrolling in my little list. I'm like, who else can I pick that's not like the 2nd or 3rd running back on their team at this point? My goal was to see what happens if I punt running back and try 0 running back at this time of the year and to see what happens. But I'll make the devil's advocate case for Miles Sanders, and why I was like, Miles Sanders.
Yeah.
They paid him.
Okay.
I'm following the money. They paid him. So I was just like, sure, why not go for it? I doubt he has the same year that he did this past year. We'll see. There's going to be a new head coach, a new GM in Carolina. So there's going to be a lot of new things happening there. Maybe this means Miles Sanders becomes relevant again. TBD.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I do want to continue with the same question, and that's Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle was a point of contention for Josh and I on the Monday shows throughout this season, where everybody drafted Jalen Waddle to be a wide receiver 1. I think that was kind of a mistake to begin with. But what I basically said was, accept who he was a wide receiver 2 with great wide receiver 1 upside. Going in the 3rd round to Mark. Now, Mark went with a 0 RB strategy here, but going in the 3rd round to Mark, that doesn't really feel like a wide receiver 2, though. Mark lands him as his wide receiver 3. What are your thoughts on 2nd year, or I guess no, 3rd year with Tyreek Hill, Tua Tagovailoa, and Jalen Waddle all together in this offense? What are your thoughts going into the 2024 season about how you'll be approaching Jalen Waddle, or is he an avoid player for you?
You know, that's a really great question, and I'm going to stall for a second while I figure out
who the heck
I am picking right now, because
let me throw some things.
Sniped again.
Yeah. Well, let me throw some interesting things out here. So we have Mark Drunken Dynasty at the 5 pick, who has went 0 running back all the way to the 9th round. That might be a record for Mock It Like It's Hot, taking his first running back, Roschon Johnson. So I do want to talk about Roschon Johnson and Tyjae Spears a little bit. I don't know if Spears went yet. If I jinxed you and fucked your pickup, sorry about that. But I do want to talk about those guys a little bit later on. We had some people who were upset with Javonte Williams going at the 7th pick. They said they almost vomited. I assume that's because they wanted it, or they didn't want it. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but the guy who drafted him has the Denver logo as his icon. So I think Javonte Williams in the 7th is an interesting pick. Our buddy Steve Miller Band, is it Foosball Badger at the 7 pick, lands the Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow stack, which I think is just an excellent way of doing your draft. And then Austin, I'll let you go ahead and talk about Jalen Waddle, and then I want to talk about Joe Zolo's team a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a value where he's being drafted, and I get drafting him where he is just because Tyreek Hill takes up so much volume in that offense. It's hard for Waddle to really break through. He kind of pops off here and there every week. He hasn't been getting the number of targets that he did his rookie season. The thing that's most intriguing to me about Jalen Waddle is just what happens when Tyreek Hill gets hurt. Like, we've seen him not be necessarily a 1-for-1 replacement, but his volume starts to shoot through the roof.
Absolutely.
If Tyreek Hill is out of the lineup. So having him in the 3rd round, and in this case as your wide receiver 3, like, that's a great build to me, to have CeeDee Lamb and Chris Olave ahead of Jalen Waddle.
Yeah. In the way Mark is building his team, I think it's just it's an excellent to land him as a 3. For a lot of folks in the 3rd round, you may be drafting your wide receiver 1, which is why I wanted to talk about Joe Zolo's team. I have known Joe for 5 years now. I don't think I've ever done a draft with Joe where his first 3 picks were not running backs. It is his steadfast, tried and true way to build a redraft team. So he starts off Bijan Robinson, Kyren Williams, Kenneth Walker, 3 running backs I adore. Kenneth Walker in the 3rd round almost feels like a steal, but it'll be interesting to see how much more they include Zach Charbonnet next season. However, then he goes Drake London as his wide receiver 1. So we are betting our hopes and dreams, as I did this previous season, on Drake London. Now, obviously, the situation is better because the Wicked Witch is dead. If you guys haven't seen it, Arthur Smith was fired today. We're not celebrating somebody's firing, except, free Bijan, free Kyle Pitts, free Drake London. That's what it really comes down to. Ron Rivera also let go today. However, Drake London, Christian Kirk, Jordan Addison, for a team that starts off stacked at 3 running backs, and he can play all 3 of these guys every single week, but he does have to start 3 wide receivers. How do you feel about that grouping? And I'd be interested if Joe's still with us in the chat, if he could talk about if he would have taken Ayuk over London, or even Higgins over London in that little 3 wide receiver run there. But how do you feel about those guys as your primary starters at wide receiver?
Honestly, I kind of love it. Like, sure, there's a lot of uncertainty in Atlanta right now. There's a good chance that they trade for or acquire a veteran quarterback. Like, I could see Ryan Tannehill very easily landing, although with Arthur Smith no longer there, maybe that's not as good of a thing. But like, sorry, my cat is destroying my camera setup right now. I could very easily see a Ryan Tannehill type quarterback ending up in Atlanta, which those guys, they know how to pepper their wide receiver one, and that's going to be Drake London. He's a beast. So maybe I don't want him as my first receiver, but Christian Kirk and Jordan Addison as the other two. I I just I don't understand, why are we still drafting Calvin Ridley ahead of Christian Kirk? I straight up do not get it. It didn't make sense to me last year, and now I really don't get it, because
At least the gap's only 4 picks and not 2 rounds.
yeah, it's gotten better, but I would definitely be taking Kirk ahead of Ridley. And Jordan Addison, he showed that he can kill it with Justin Jefferson on or off the field. So I love having that upside. The only issue with Addison is he's competing for targets with Hawkinson and Jefferson, but I still love it.
And Joe Zolo just waters it down. Great question. Ridley is poo-poo. So that's Joe's take on the whole situation. And Austin, I have a comparison I'm about to make out loud for the very first time. And this is heavy praise. And they are players I am super interested in getting my hands on for next season. There are 2 running backs that fit the mold of another running back that caught my heart last year. So last season, Kyren Williams, when he came into the league, was looked at as a pass catcher who needed to develop. And he wasn't really used very much at all as a rookie. Comes into this season and then isn't even really a pass catcher, just kind of does everything for the Rams. 2 players who fit that exact same mold, in my opinion, are Tyjae Spears and Roschon Johnson. You have guys who were looked at primarily as their teams as pass catchers. One is stuck behind Derrick Henry. The other is inexplicably stuck by Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman, though we did see Roschon Johnson a little bit more involved. Folks, I will scroll the draft towards the end of the draft later on, but I wanted to get these last couple of guys out. I'm not saying, but I am saying that Tyjae Spears and Roschon Johnson are the next Kyren Williams, both of them together. But with these offenses, assuming the Bears offense remains the Bears offense and what it is in this current form, they're obviously going to be adding some sort of piece with the first pick of the draft. How do we feel? Is Derrick Henry back next season? Is he back as a tight end next season? How do we feel about Tyjae Spears, Roschon Johnson heading into next season? Could we see an expansion of their roles a la Kyren Williams and with the Rams?
Yeah, I'll start with Roschon Johnson because that's a lot easier one in my mind. So the short answer is yes. I think we do see an expansion of Roschon Johnson's role in the Bears backfield. He, I think, got overlooked because he was the number 2 to Bijan Robinson, which is just a hard comparison to make, but Roschon Johnson was a great prospect coming out of Texas. However, what does that expansion look like? I don't think he hits the Kyren Williams level of opportunities and production, just because I don't think that's how the Chicago offense is going to work. Like, I think they're either going to have, most likely they're either going to have Justin Fields or Caleb Williams as their quarterback. Both of those guys can run. Both of those guys are going to look to scramble instead of checking down to their running backs. They still have Khalil Herbert, and I could see them having a third running back just as a backup option, just the way they did this past year. So maybe Johnson becomes the number 1 in that backfield instead of the number 2 or 3, but I wouldn't expect him to take the sort of leap that Kyren Williams did. As for Tyjae Spears, I think it is more likely to me that the Titans bring in another running back into that backfield than to rely on Tyjae Spears as a 3-down back. I don't know that we have seen him have the durability that he needs to have all 3 downs, and I don't know that they want to. I don't know that that's the direction the NFL is going. And honestly, if Mike Vrabel isn't there anymore, that may not be the mold and the identity of that offense anymore. There's a good chance he finds himself coaching somewhere else this year because out of choice, not necessarily being fired, but I could see that changing the identity of that offense somewhat. And regardless, I think.
Are you implying Mike Vrabel is going to coach the New England Patriots? Because that is an interesting take, and that would be the only team I could see him leaving for.
I have heard it floated as a possibility. I wouldn't. Okay. So it would not shock me, right, if they move on from Bill Belichick, that they go to a former Patriot in Mike Vrabel. And you cannot convince me that if Vrabel wasn't offered a job with the Patriots, that you wouldn't take it.
I don't mean to just call you out like that, but
so. I mean, yeah, sure.
I'm not sure if you got a chance to finish your point. You threw me off with the Mike Vrabel talk there.
Yeah, no, it's good. I just, see, Faith wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate Mike Vrabel in New England as well, but
Joe hates everything. So I'm going to be interested to see Joe's comment as it pops up on the screen.
Oh, of course. But I do think that they probably bring in someone else with Tajay Spears. I don't think that the three down back is the default. I think it's more the exception than the rule now in the NFL.
All right. My last question for you in the top half of the draft involves tight ends. And it's two players who went within 4 picks of one another. I'm going to look at Axe Harding's team. Starts off running back, Brees Hall, Jonathan Taylor. Goes with 2 of my favorite wide receivers to play football. I am an unabashed Keenan Allen, Mike Evans guy. No team that has them on it. I don't care if it's 10 years from now and they're still somehow playing. That's going to be my favorite team. And then Jonathan Taylor, one of my favorites. Axe Harding probably has my favorite team. But he gets a tight end. And I'm wondering if this might be our first recency bias trap. And that is David Njoku. David Njoku has looked like a man possessed. I hate to go back to an old joke, but he was rebirthed in the Flames and has played very, very well this season with Joe Flacco. The assumption is that we're going back to Deshaun Watson next year. Are we going to see a David Njoku who is worthy of being taken just in the first 8 rounds of a draft, first 7 rounds of a draft, Austin? And I'll let you just bring in the next tight end in this. Are we going to see a David Njoku who should be going ahead of Kyle Pitts, who may also be facing a vastly better situation next
year? Yeah. So I'm just going to start with David Njoku because I'm too emotionally upset about Kyle Pitts to really dive into that right now. David Njoku, I don't know. I've always been very nervous about David Njoku as a tight end, and it took Joe Flacco to really unlock him. I don't see putting him ahead of Dalton Kincaid, Darren Waller. Honestly, as much as I hate to say this, I don't see putting him ahead of Cole Kmet if Deshaun Watson is the quarterback.
I was going to address the Cole Kmet thing, so don't worry, Faith. I saw you were ready for the battle that was going to happen. I don't think it's going to be a battle this season. I may have turned a page on Cole Kmet, but that's really.
Yeah, same. And I mean, having him ahead of Dallas Goedert, like that's just wild to me. So I don't know. It's one of those things that's like really depends on who is under center. Maybe Deshaun Watson has learned from watching Joe Flacco and takes some lessons and figures out how to keep David Njoku unlocked. But I feel nervous about that. As far as taking Njoku ahead of Kyle Pitts, boy, it's just the Falcons offseason is going to be so interesting. I think it's going to just depend on who is the quarterback for them next year. I think whoever the next head coach is, though, is going to learn a lesson from Arthur Smith and actually use their players, their elite players. So Kyle Pitts' usage should go up, which in that case, I would still be willing to draft Kyle Pitts at probably ahead of David Njoku, just because I think the traits of Kyle Pitts are there to warrant still taking a shot on him.
No, I think that's really, really fair. And Njoku stood out to me. He may end up being the oops of the draft. I don't really see any glaring ones. I was actually going to lean on the Calvin Ridley before. Does Austin have an oops of the draft? Or is that the Miles Sanders pick?
I was about to say, there's Miles Sanders.
Yeah. I usually don't pick on you with the oops of the draft. Maybe today is the day that I do it. I want to get to a question that Craig asked a while ago, and he asked it twice. I have it starred on here twice. But the long and short is, he mentioned that in last year's draft, he ended up with a lot of players of the same bye week, and he felt that he messed up with that and wants to know if there are resources to look at. And Austin, I'm just going to ask you if you agree with me. I don't think you messed up with players with the same bye week. When I first started fantasy football, and I remember you saying earlier on, Craig, this is your second year playing, I was very adamant about I'm not going to take players with the same bye week. I got to be very careful about that. I need to pay attention. Other than quarterbacks in a super flex where I'm not going to be able to replace them, I do not care about player bye weeks. My roster in week 8 is going to look very different than my roster did in week 1. Let's be clear. My roster in week 1 looks different than it did the day after the draft. My roster in week 3 looks nothing like it did in week 1. I am a trader. I am willing to cut bait with people very quickly to go on to waivers. Maybe that's a product of me writing the waiver wire article here at Club Fantasy. But Austin, I have given up long ago giving any care about players bye weeks or having too many players with the same bye week other than quarterbacks in a super flex. And obviously best ball is a whole different thing, but that's not what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I'm there too. I think aside from quarterback, and I wouldn't even care about it too much with tight end. Just because you're probably not even drafting 2 tight ends. So I'm with you. I'm usually not worrying about the bye week. Honestly, there's part of me that's like feels comfortable just, stacking my bye weeks and figuring it out for that 1 week and then not having to worry about it the rest of the weeks.
Yeah, take that week 8 L so you don't have to ever worry about it again. I'm with that strategy sometimes, but for me, it's best player available every time. Could not care less what the bye week is.
Yeah.
And then the elephant in the room, Austin, is Faith just put, yeah, I did it, and not ironically. And anybody who has watched this show for any period of time knows that Faith is talking about taking Cole Kmet with the 9th pick. And I feel like I have the biggest crow to eat here before Josh comes in and just cuts the broadcast. I am no longer going to give anybody shit about drafting Cole Kmet. I believe this kid has finally turned a page. Joe Zolo throws out Cole Kmet 6 touchdowns. I think this kid has finally turned a page. I think he and Justin Fields are on the same page. I would very much like to see Justin Fields remain the quarterback there. While DJ Moore has gone off, I watched a lot of those games, and Cole Kmet was the panic look by Justin Fields. And let's be clear, with that offensive line, he's panicked quite a bit. And there were still passes that Justin Fields was sailing to a wide open Cole Kmet. Justin Fields has a lot of growth that he's going to need to do to get the max out of Cole Kmet. However, back to my point, Cole Kmet was the tight end 8 this season. He is one of only 2 tight ends who made the top 10 with fewer than 100 targets. 6 touchdowns is not a hard number to sustain, Austin. So I will no longer be shaming the drafting of Cole Kmet on Mock It Like It's Hot. I think he is a viable option, especially as late in the draft where Faith got him. And I know you addressed that a little bit already.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Joe Zola is going berserk in the chat right now. Joe, sorry, by the way, I cleared my cookies and cache on my computer, so I was logged out of the admin permissions of this, so I cannot put your comment up for you. It's gonna be up to Ryan.
Oh, I see I didn't even get what he was saying. Cole Kmet 6 touchdowns, Travis Kelce 5 touchdowns. Now I see what Joe's throwing out there. So now Joe is Travis Kelce now in Joe's Cole Kmet bullseye.
Yeah. Cole Kmet, he's now going to be in this category of the Dalton Schultzes, the Luke Musgraves, I guess this is where Darren Waller is falling to now. These kind of late round guys that I will look to if I don't get one of the top 3 tight ends early on. I feel comfortable with it. The target share was there. And, I think regardless of who the quarterback is, like, he was utilized in the system, and I think he probably will continue to be.
Yeah. Looking at these tight ends as they're drafted, and obviously everything could change. Kelce, Laporta, Hockenson, Andrews, those guys belong in the top 4. You can make an argument for Trey McBride to be the 5th tight end over Kittle. But what I will say is I believe the top 4, and then I believe it is Trey McBride, George Kittle. I'm going to say Dalton Kincaid and Cole Kmet who belong in that next group, because these are the guys where I see the most potential for a season next year. And let's be clear, Kittle probably belongs at the back end of that group. He's not getting any younger. He is 31 years old. He's dealt with injury woes, though I don't believe much or any this season. We saw bad Brock Purdy this year. It wasn't just slinging it for touchdowns to George Kittle every week. He was the other tight end at under 90 targets who made the top 10. He also scored 6 touchdowns, which for George Kittle, also a big number. Is Cole Kmet George Kittle, Austin?
No, we're not going that far. Maybe from a fantasy perspective, sure.
Everything I say is from fantasy, folks. I am not saying Kmet is half the tight end George Kittle is. George Kittle is a beast. But for fantasy, is Cole Kmet George Kittle?
I mean, yeah, if you look at his stat lines from week to week, he kind of has the volatility of George Kittle. Like, if he gets in the end zone in particular, he's killing it. And he has just as many 2 and 5 point performances as he does 20+ point performances. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess he is George Kittle. Another tight end that we have to throw out there that fell very far is Evan Ingram. He now has 2 consecutive seasons as a top 5 tight end.
He's tight end 2 this season after tight end 5 last year, and nobody wants him.
He had 143 targets. That is ridiculous for a tight end. he's not a tight end. That's the thing. He's a wide receiver. Like maybe this becomes a moot point because Sleeper's like, nope, we're done counting him as a tight end. But him going in the 12th round of this is wild.
As the second to last tight end, even drafted third to last tight end. I do, because you said he's not a tight end. Joe's comment just fits here so well. What even are tight ends when you really think about it? In fantasy, they are a thorn in your side, but I think next year we could finally see some change. I want to throw one other guy out there, and that is Jake Ferguson. Steve Miller, who is drafting 8th here at or 7th, I believe, at Foosballer, grabs Ferguson as as a third tight end. I might have found my oops of the draft there. But anyway, grabs Ferguson as his second after drafting 3, and brings up the point that he is currently the second best pass catcher on a team that throws the ball a ton. Is Ferguson a guy who needs brought up there?
That's a great question. He just felt so touchdown dependent to me that I think he's fine going in these later rounds. He was kind of this guy that going into the season, you could sneak him as a value because people weren't really thinking about Jake Ferguson. I don't think he showed enough this year for me to be like, yeah, he's a clear top 10 tight end moving forward. Like, to me, he's going to be in this category that guys like Hunter Henry have been at for a while, where when you get towards the end of your draft and you don't have a tight end, you start picking your favorite of those options. I don't feel like I can count on Ferguson just because it feels like who gets the touchdowns might vary from week to week. And this was also a down year for Dallas in terms of running back touchdowns. So if that bounces back and it takes away touchdown opportunities from Ferguson, then I worry about how that all bounces out. Like, he's a fine player to draft, but I'm not going out of my way.
Perfect. Austin, I'm going to handle some of these questions by myself to wrap up the show, but I want to give you the chance that we do at the end of every show, and that is to discuss your team. If you had a strategy, if you were sniped, if there were any changes to your strategy in the middle of the draft. As you full know, you do not need to talk about every player, but talk about whoever you want. I know you have a hard out at 1, so let's get this done in 120 seconds.
Yeah. So my strategy was to try 0 running back and see how it went, which I think I actually did 0 running back this time. I went 6 rounds without
I would say 7th round
back.
and then get David Montgomery as a dream come true until you fucked it up with the next pick. But
yeah, Miles Sanders, maybe not a great pick, but David Montgomery, I love getting him in the 7th round. He still has the touchdown upside. I still think he's a good running back. So I love how that played out. I love the value on Josh Allen. You couldn't get him in the 3rd round last year. It was a 2nd round or bust. He was going in the 1st round at times. And he continues to consistently be the quarterback 1 in fantasy football. And I don't see that changing. Like, his production is so consistent, regardless of how volatile his NFL performance is, that I feel great about that value. And then from there, I was just loading up on my favorite receivers that I could get. I think T. Higgins was an interesting name that we didn't talk about, or he's probably going to be going somewhere new next year as the wide receiver 1 in his offense. And so that's potential upgrade for Higgins. Myers was a target beast this year. Devonta Adams getting on up in age, so he may be able to share some of the load with Myers better. And then I just kind of started throwing darts towards the end. But last thing I'll say, and you can talk about this if you want after I jump off, but I took Jared Goff as my second quarterback. I'm starting to wonder, I don't know if this is just going to be an overreaction after this past year, but I'm curious if we're going to see more 2 quarterback builds after the slogfest of injuries we had at quarterback this season. Like, are people going to start saying, I need to have a decent backup in place? Or is it a strategy to have a decent backup in place so that when some other quarterback goes down, you have that trade bait stashed on your roster?
My younger brother did that with Tua Tagovailoa this season. I'm going to let you go. Austin, thank you so much. If you're not following him, it's at Austin_FFL. He will be back with me every single Monday in March as we do this. Austin, thank you for your time today. Have a great one.
See ya.
To address Austin's point about 2 quarterback leagues, it is something that I actually am okay with, drafting 2 quarterbacks if you know your league. And I will tell you guys a point that I do at the end of every season while the league is fresh in my mind. If I know I'm going to be in that league next season, I take notes to remind myself about some of the tendencies of my league mates. I don't always know all of these people. And one of the things is I have a league that I play where everybody drafts and hoards 2 quarterbacks. So I know in that league, maybe it's worth it to go quarterback a little earlier than I normally would. And also, I am also going to draft and hoard 2 quarterbacks because I'm not going to be able to go to waivers and get the guy I want. So while normally I would give Austin a hard time about drafting Jared Goff as a second quarterback, it's an excellent point to bring up in the correct league. And as you get into some of these deeper leagues, 12 team, 14 team leagues, that's going to make quarterbacks a little bit more valuable. And Mark brings up in his work league, the champion had 3 quarterbacks for the last half of the season. So there's definitely going to be interesting points to be made for different leagues. And then Joe, with just comedy gold, throws out that Austin definitely went 0 running back if he drafted Miles Sanders. And I think that is just an excellent point to give Austin a little bit of a hard time. I'm not against 0 running back. However, when you strike out so badly, and it was a known mistake on his part to take Miles Sanders, you didn't really hammer the position later on. You continued to go with Josh Downs and Khalil Shakir. Khalil Herbert, not a bad pick in the 11th round, but I feel like you could have used more running backs in a 2 running back build or in a 0 running back build. It's something where you need to build that stable in order to talk about it or to be able to back end any of that. Joe, with the pick of the draft, manages to land a Hall of Famer with the 14-5 in Reggie White. And he doesn't understand how someone with 4 seasons of over 100 tackles and double-digit sacks was able to fall that far. Great pick by Joe. Joe did bring up an excellent point. I'm not going to scroll through the comments and find it, but Joe said it's a little bit harder to slog through these bottom players when there are no rookies in this draft. At the end of a draft, that is going to be a time where it's probably best to take a flyer on a lottery pick like a rookie player. I wanted to ask Austin where he thinks Marvin Harrison, not even dependent on team, fits into this draft. And if you guys have any ideas, throw it into the comments. But looking for me, Marvin Harrison is looking at like a very, very good top 5 drafted wide receiver. I think probably right in here is where he's going to fit in if he's not being overdrafted. So at 3-1, we had Devonta Smith. DJ Moore goes 3-3. Jalen Waddle at that 3-5 we talked about a little bit. And Devontae Adams at 3-6. I think that's the grouping when you look at the players who went before him. Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs. Diggs might have been a little bit of a reach based on what we saw from him this year. I think that's where Marvin Harrison fits in. I would love to know where you guys and then Steve Miller says he would have certainly taken him over Travis Etienne, and that was your 3rd pick. Okay, so right about where I thought he would go. So that's an excellent thing to know there, Steve. I appreciate that. Someone asked, it was George Cook, asked how we feel about where he got Rashee Rice and Jaden Reed. And those are 2 players that I like a lot heading into next season. George started with the 11th pick, went A.J. Brown, Cooper Kupp, grabs Kamara, Connor, Robinson, and then gets in between his running backs, Rashee Rice at the 5, Jaden Reed at the 6. And I think that's excellent value, and it's exactly what we were talking about for a team like Joe Zolo's, where he went running back heavy with the volume of wide receivers that are still wide receiver 1s. Rashee Rice is almost certainly going to be the wide receiver 1 in Kansas City next year unless we see something very different from the Chiefs. And Jaden Reed looks very much like he's going to be Jordan Love's favorite target, though Christian Watson in his one healthy game absolutely went off. But I like the way they're using Jaden Reed. And just before that, Zay Flowers, another one. I think that's excellent value there for your team. I'm not 0 running back guy. I'm more of hero running back guy. And I certainly am not going to call Alvin Kamara a hero. So for your team, I don't necessarily love it. I probably would have prioritized running back in that spot. But for a team like Joe Zolo, who he didn't really, he did. He could have took Rashee Rice over Christian Kirk, though I do love Christian Kirk. He could not have taken Jaden Reed over Jordan Addison, but I feel like that fits a team that started very heavy running back. I'm not going to say it was better or worse than what Joe Zolo did. I'm nervous about Drake London, but I'm certainly hoping for the best. And then I'm going to throw Craig's last comment up here. He's been hearing a lot more about Baltimore tight end. And I think that's going to be an interesting situation to watch heading into next season, is how the Baltimore Ravens are going to handle Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews together. Are they just going to run a ton of 12 personnel and we're going to see a lot more 2 tight end sets? Likely seems like he is very good sliding out to the slot. And we've actually seen Mark Andrews do that as well, but Mark Andrews is the more prototypical tight end. So I'm going to be interested to see what they do with both of those tight ends next season. It's going to be very hard to decide who we're going to draft or how we're going to draft Mark Andrews, because it's going to be hard to consider him an elite tight end when he gets hurt this year and Isaiah Likely comes in and just balls out. Are they going to find a reason to get Likely on the field more? Or is this just going to be a thing where the position is the position and Mark Andrews is just going to feast Our resident Green Bay Packers fan, Joel Worth, I did not get the right comment there because someone else commented, says Jaden Reed's going to be a superstar. He is all on the Jaden Reed thing there. And if you can get the question in here quick too, Rich, I'm about to shut this thing down. What do you got here, Dynasty? Nick Chubb is on the clock at 13.5 in a Dynasty. I'm probably not making that pick. Chubb's age, I would need to know who else is there for you if you want to shoot us a DM later on. Chubb's age at 13.5, if I can quickly get my Dynasty rankings up here. Let's see. Chubb's age and injury, because that was a big injury. Let's never forget that. I don't think in the second round I'm really considering Nick Chubb. So at running back, I have Chubb. Yeah, I'm way down on Nick Chubb right now. So bear with me, guys. This was an unexpected question. But let's just say no. In the second round, I'm not taking Nick Chubb. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm looking at this completely wrong. Thank you, Joel. 13th round. Yes, I'm looking at it as the 13th pick. So yes, take Nick Chubb in the 13th round all day, every day. Thank you, guys. Clearly, I'm flustered doing this show by myself at the very end. Take Nick Chubb in the 13th round, please, and thank you. You're not going to be upset about that. Guys, that is going to be the end of the show. I thank each and every one of you for riding with us. As Joe points out, Nick Chubb in the 13th round is free money. Take that pick very quickly, but feel free to shoot me a DM. I'll be more than happy to work with you. This is going to be the last Monday show of the 2023 season. Enjoy the playoffs. Get in those playoff bowls. Don't forget DFS. We do a DFS show every single Friday, and Austin has an article to come out with it as well. Mock drafting is going to come back for us in March. We may even be doing 2 shows this year. It's going to be a really, really fun time. So make sure you're following Club Fantasy. If you're watching on YouTube, it's an extra click. Just go ahead and click subscribe, like, comment, do all the things that are going to help us get monetized so we can keep bringing you guys this great content. This was a wonderful ride this season. I had a lot of fun on Mondays, and we're going to bring that fun back to you guys in March. We are a 12-month-a-year show, though. Our Wednesday flagship show, no pun intended, with myself, Joe Zolo, who you guys have seen in the comments, and Josh Hudson, who you've seen in the comments. We go every single Wednesday except for the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So you're still going to get great content from Club Fantasy, just not on Mondays until March is back. Thank you guys for tuning in. And remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. I'll see you guys at the next mock draft.